When we talk about female reproduction, we have to talk about the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. We'll talk about the hormones in a little bit that regulate it, but the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle need to line up. So I'm going to create a little table here. So this is my uterine cycle. Why do they need to line up? Because when the ovary ovulates, when it releases the egg and it can become potentially fertilized by sperm, the uterus needs to be ready for possible implantation. So we have to have coordination between these two cycles. So in the ovarian cycle, we have what is called the follicular phase. So this is the development of a oocyte as it goes from prophase 1, where it's been arrested, to metaphase 2. And the follicular phase is named after the structure in the ovary called the follicle. So the follicle contains the oocyte, but it also contains a bunch of other cells that produce hormones like estrogen. So the follicular phase corresponds to what is called the proliferative phase in the uterine cycle. Proliferative means that the cells of the endometrium are undergoing mitosis. So endometrial cells are undergoing mitosis. Okay, so once we have the developing follicle releasing its egg during ovulation, so we have like this event, which is ovulation, which doesn't really have a corresponding uterine part, and there's also the menstrual cycle, which doesn't have quite a corresponding ovarian cycle. So ovulation occurs. So I'll just put, okay. So after the ovarian cycle, we have what is referred to as the luteal cycle, or the luteal phase, excuse me. And the luteal phase is that the leftover follicular cells become a structure called the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum also produces hormones. In fact, it produces estrogen or estradiol and also progesterone. So the luteal phase corresponds to the secretory phase. So this is where the endometrium becomes vascular and glandular. Glandular. So vascular means that there's blood supply to it, which is going to be important when the embryo burrows its way in. It's going to feed off of the blood. And glandular, they actually release like glycogen, which is a type of glucose, and it feeds the developing embryo. So that is the secretory phase. Now, if implantation does not occur, okay, so we'll put if implantation does not occur, then we have the degeneration of the corpus luteum, which doesn't actually have a phase, but degeneration of the corpus luteum. And this corresponds to the shedding of the endometrium, which is called the menstrual phase. So the endometrium is shed off. It actually is done this by the blood vessels that were supplying nutrients and oxygen constrict, and the cells die, and then a whole bunch of it just sheds off. So it's kind of an interesting thing that happens. And you know what's really weird is that a lot of organisms, even a lot of mammals, don't have menstrual phases. They don't actually bleed during the menstrual cycle. But in humans, it seems to be important, and it seems to be like maybe it is protective, because by shedding that lining, perhaps you're maybe getting rid of anything else that could be in there that could possibly cause damage, like bacteria, for example, or other things that could be in there. Okay, so let's look at this cycle. So in your book, they have a diagram. This is the ovarian phases. You need to know that the follicular and the luteal phases are ovarian. The follicle that is released is the oocyte, right? The cycles of the follicular phase correspond to the proliferative phase. Here we're showing the endometrium becoming thick. The luteal phase causes the secretory phase, right? And then if the corpus luteum degenerates, then you have a shedding off of the lining of the uterus, which is referred to as the menstrual phase. So let's look at what are the hormones involved. So we have the anterior pituitary. So this would be like hormones. The anterior pituitary, which is governed by what? The hypothalamus, ultimately. So the anterior pituitary produces the follicle stimulating hormone. That is FSH. That causes the follicular phase, right? The anterior pituitary also produces the luteal hormone, or LH. So this is FSH. This is LH. And you can see that both of those, FSH and LH, have this like peak right around ovulation. And it is actually believed to be that luteal hormone, LH, seems to be more important in determining when that ovulation occurs. So this is a kind of a burst. Notice that it's low, and then all of a sudden it increases dramatically, and that is when ovulation occurs. Right? So it causes that, and then it stays kind of high unless the corpus luteum is degenerated. Okay. So we also have the ovarian hormones that play an important role. And there's a form of estrogen called estradiol. So what this does is that this is produced by the developing follicle. And it is actually what causes the proliferation of the endometrium. This is produced by the developing follicle. This causes an increase in cell division, which is interesting because we have estrogen mimicking hormones, which are sometimes referred to as endocrine disruptors. And we're producing these synthetically and releasing them into our environment. And they might actually be decreasing the fertility of all types of animals. And possibly even including humans, decrease in fertility. But they can also lead to an increase in cancer, because anytime we get an increase in cell division because of these hormones, there's a chance that the cells will divide, a mutation will occur, and then this causes cancer to develop. We also have the progesterone. And this is produced, as well as estradiol, is produced during the luteal phase by the corpus luteum. So luteal phase, the corpus luteum produces this along with estradiol. And what does that do? That actually maintains the lining of the uterus. And so it causes, notice that progesterol, it is associated with secretory phase. So the secretory phase, right, is that progesterone. And if the embryo implants, these will stay high and the lining will be maintained. If the embryo does not implant, then these will go low right here. This is that premenstrual phase when both estradiol and progesterone are low. And this is right before the shedding of the endometrium. And so you should know the roles of both the anterior pituitary hormones as well as the roles of the ovarian hormones in this regulation of this complex multi-organ female reproductive cycle.